What will she find in your pockets? On a Saturday morning in September 2010, I sat down for my customary hour with a cup of coffee, some Danish pastries, and the Guardian newspaper, a part of my weekly routine which I had always relished. On this occasion, however, the pages fell open at an image which shook me so profoundly that the coffee turned cold and the pastries remained uneaten. The image was a photograph by the photojournalist Chris Hondros, who had documented scenes from the Iraq War. It depicted a young Iraqi girl, Samar Hassan, in the moments after her parents had been killed. The caption underneath the photo explained that her parents had been driving in their car and had failed to stop at a US Army checkpoint. The soldiers, one of whose legs and gun loom into the puddle of light in Hondros's picture, shot into the car as the driver attempted to speed away, killing the two adults instantly and spattering Samar Hassan's hands, face and dress with blood. In the picture, the blood on the dress is shown mingling with the roses imprinted in the fabric of her dress. I had long been opposed to the war in Iraq, and as I stared at the picture and read the article, my hands began to itch, longing to grasp some sort of tool which would capture my own anger and horror whilst it was still red and raw. I rummaged through my desk, found some red and black crayons, and began to draw a reproduction of the image. When it came to covering the picture with a wash of black paint, I was too preoccupied to spend time searching my house for paintbrushes. Instead, I dashed into my bathroom, grabbed my toothbrush, and used it to apply the paint, scoring into the watercolour paper with the bristles. The resulting picture was an instant visceral record of my own emotional state as I was confronted with just one of the hundreds of thousands of individual tragedies which have been enacted in Iraq. Whilst I was painting it, a song with a nursery rhyme tune was developing in my mind, a lyric which connected the roses on her dress with the blood roses on the concrete floor. What did the thugs in khaki think who shot into her car, that they could fire, eliminate, and never leave a scar? At the time of writing, it felt like more of an expression of bewilderment than of anti-military or anti-American sentiment. Although when I started sharing it with other people, they were quick to find these in what I had written. Not long after this event, WikiLeaks released the Collateral Murder video, a flight recording from an American Apache helicopter above the streets of Baghdad, in which the pilot and officers on board shoot a group of journalists and then fire into the van that comes to rescue the wounded, all the while talking like a group of boys playing Nintendo. There were children in the van, and one was shot in the guts. By the time I saw the video, Chelsea Manning had been imprisoned for leaking it, along with a number of other secret documents relating to American military activity in Iraq. Once again, I felt the anger welling up in me and wrote a song culminating in a couplet, "And those Iraqi children with wounds in guts and head, are they forever crippled? Do they weep, or are they dead?" Nobody seemed to know the answer to that question. A US soldier on the ground at that same incident, Ethan McCord, had testified that his commanding officers dilly-dallied about sending the injured children to hospital. McCord himself was traumatized by having found the gut-shot girl, but when he sought counseling from the US military, he was told, "You need to suck that shit up." In other words, to deal with it, to accept it as an unfortunate reality, and to shut up about it so that nobody is scandalized by the deaths, maiming, and psychological scarring of children in wartime. One of the things I love about Banksy's art is that he refuses to suck that shit up. Instead, he sprays all that shit out for the world to see it. His "Have a Nice Day" stencil is an excellent example of that refusal. Banksy is able to control that visceral response to brutality and concentrate it in images which really do speak 1,000 words. After the first shooting in the Collateral Murder video, A man, later shown to be an Iraqi journalist, is seen crawling along the pavement, clutching his viscera to his body. "Come on now, buddy," says one of the personnel inside the Apache helicopter. "Pick up a weapon," willing the wounded man to give the Apache an excuse to fire on him again. When Ethan McCord tried to offer succor to the girl with bullets in her guts, his CO told him, "What the fuck you doing? They're just Iraqi kids." These vicious bits of glibness are echoed in Banksy's stencil. "Have a nice day" is the soldier's devastatingly witty bit of sarcasm as the next Hellfire missile is launched, and the next bit of collateral damage, i.e. innocent civilian, is splattered against a wall. There are colour versions of the image too. In these, there is a whole fleet of helicopters, somehow reminiscent of those which launch a raid on a Vietnamese village and school, whilst its CO goes surfing in Francis Ford Coppola's film Apocalypse Now. "I love the smell of napalm in the morning," shouts the crazed and brutalized officer over the gunfire and the sound of the 1812 overture booming from loudspeakers inside the helicopters. Meanwhile, teachers run with children or try to shelter them with their own bodies as men in helicopters strafe with machine guns. But Banksy's fleet of helicopters might have been requisitioned for other purposes, since each bears a nice pink ribbon. Wouldn't it be good, Banksy's image might be saying, if the resources that big imperial powers threw into military technology were spent on doing something which might more effectively give people a nice day, like offering them free education, or sending them doctors and nurses, or taking positive steps to reduce the utterly obscene gulf in wealth and privilege between the richest and poorest people on the planet? Why does the West gift wrap its missiles and let its armaments manufacturers infiltrate almost every aspect of its own society? Even the last UK census was administered by Lockheed Martin, makers of cluster bombs and Trident missiles and interrogators at Guantanamo Bay, when it has not yet found an effective way to gift wrap compassion and tolerance. Moreover, another Banksy stencil seems to ask, why does the angry individual caught up in a tide of violence fall back on the models for conflict resolution offered by our governments? Why is it always the Molotov cocktail that gets thrown and never the bunch of flowers? And why, even more importantly, is a small child like Samar Hassan showered not with rose petals but with her parents' blood, when a number of angry individuals, now known as insurgents, rise up against institutional violence with yet more violence? The first casualty of war is truth, the saying used to go. But in modern wars, when 90% of the casualties are not soldiers but civilians, there can be no doubt that as the prime casualty of war, truth comes a poor second to children who are maimed, killed, and orphaned by conflicts they are still too young to understand. The story of Samar Hassan has a horrible postscript. Samar's brother, Rakan, was also injured in the shooting. He was rushed to an American hospital, and the American media featured his story. His story was fated as a tale of hope and redemption. Eventually, he returned to live with what remained of his family, but one day he was blown to pieces by a bomb set by Iraqi insurgents who were angry that he had accepted treatment in America. Samar Hassan is now orphaned, brotherless, and hopelessly bewildered in a life which seems to have offered her nothing but another vicious and agonizing twist at every turn. Chris Hondros, the photographer who took Samar Hassan's picture on that horrible day, was later killed in Misrata, Libya, whilst documenting yet more harrowing and tragic events. But even that is not the end of the story. My song about Samar Hassan received thousands of hits on YouTube. One of them was from a soldier who had been involved in the shooting. "I had got it all wrong," he said. "The Guardian article had been misleading. He denied that the incident had occurred at a checkpoint. He said that he had felt certain that insurgents were in the car, that he and his comrades had fired on the basis of that certainty. He told me that not a day passed when the scene of Samar's grief and suffering did not play upon his mind. Now I, too, was complicit in the grief surrounding Samar Hassan's tragedy. I had rubbed salt into the psychological wounds of the soldier who had killed her parents. I found myself in a state of contrition, rewriting the ending of the song. We think they're only pixels, a simulated dying, the pictures on the evening news edit out her crying, and from the comfort of our chairs we're deaf to all her pleading. The scapegoat soldier coils in pain while human hearts are bleeding. Our taxes pay for blood and loss, for war knows no recession. We pay and let the children scream and never learn our lesson. I still think that Banksy is right not to suck that shit up. I still think that our imperialistic wars are unjustified. I still think that our culture is permeated with messages designed to persuade young people to see violence as an accepted solution to problems on the international stage. I still think that children are the first casualty of war, and that no military objective is worth the cost of a single child's life. I still smile wryly at Banksy's stencil of a girl in a pink dress who has disarmed a soldier and is now frisking him as he stands with his hands against the wall. But after that letter from the soldier who orphaned Samar Hassan, I have come to realize that when the girl reaches into the soldier's pocket, there is at least a chance that her hand will clasp around a handkerchief that is saturated with the soldier's own tears. Gandhi said, "I object to violence because when it appears to do good, the good is only temporary, the evil it does is permanent." Even in the 21st century, it is left to a street artist like Banksy to make us aware of this obvious fact. It is not really the soldier who needs a good frisking. It is the governments and corporations which persist in perpetuating violence. And insofar as we acquiesce in violence ourselves, the little girl also needs to frisk us. What will she find in your pockets? A concealed weapon? A pledge of acquiescence in the rule of the military-industrial complex? A handkerchief soaked with tears? Or a program for spreading compassion and reconciliation, the things that do some permanent good?